How did the voice of that basketball player become a beacon that awakened a nation from its slumber? Trump thought he should have remained silent. But Jimmy Butler didn't just speak up that day. He shook the entire country. Trump, emboldened by his own confidence, threatened to send Jimmy Butler to jail. But you won't believe what happened next. But before we get to the story, take a second to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories that represent the spirit of basketball. Right now, the press room wasn't very crowded that day, but the tension inside felt as if the walls were collapsing on top of those present. The reporters were clutching their pens as if they were weapons. Meanwhile, the cameras were flashing, and the atmosphere in the White House briefing room suddenly changed, becoming heavier than usual. President Trump walked toward the podium, his face tense, but his voice sharp, and without even saying hello, crumpled up the notes in front of him and pushed them aside. Skipping his opening remarks, he went straight to the point. He began without naming names. "There is a so-called public figure," he said. "He is inciting people with lies. He is sabotaging our election process. This person is inciting rebellion in our society." There was a brief silence. Then the name was clearly heard. Jimmy Butler. He said the name slowly and emphatically. "This man must be investigated. In fact, I say, he should be put in jail." The room fell completely silent. It was as if a door had been closed and the key taken away, trapping those inside. The journalists looked at each other. Some, in shock, immediately grabbed their keyboards. The president had declared one of the country's most famous athletes a rebel in public. And for what reason? Simply for criticizing an executive order. A reporter in the second row asked in a strained and somewhat fearful voice, "Mr. President, will you be giving instructions to the Justice Department regarding this person?" Trump interrupted him. "It's being looked into," he said. "This man looks dangerous. He is sowing discord among the people at a time when we need to be united. People like him should not think they can say whatever they want and get away with it." The staff behind him stirred. The unease was palpable. Things were starting to move not only in the press room, but also in the corridors of the White House. But the real break, even if they didn't want it to, would happen outside. Within just 10 minutes, footage of that moment began circulating on TikTok, YouTube, and X. Trump's face was frozen in mid-sentence. The red banner below read, "Trump threatens Jimmy Butler with jail time." At that moment, in Miami, Jimmy Butler was watching the screen quietly and calmly in the back room of his house. He held his phone in his hand for a few seconds. With a quick tap on play again, he watched it again. His press advisor, Marcus Ray, stood next to him, staring at him. "We need to respond," he whispered. Jimmy nodded in agreement without taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes," he said, "but not in the way they expect." That evening, the phones didn't stop ringing. Many media outlets, from ESPN to CNN, were waiting for a statement from them. Sports commentators were raising their voices on live broadcasts. Some found Trump's words unprecedented. Others accused Jimmy of being irresponsible and inflammatory. But the real question was completely different. What was Jimmy going to do now? But Jimmy had saved the answer to that question for the morning. The next day, at 9:08 a.m., Jimmy Butler went live simultaneously on Instagram, X, and YouTube. There was a plain wall in the background. He had placed his phone on top of a stack of books. He didn't use any filters. There was no music. There was no preparation, just him, wearing a plain t-shirt. He looked at the screen. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good morning," he said in a calm voice. "I want to speak directly to you, to everyone who knows and supports me. Last night you heard what the president said about me. He said I should be in jail. Why? Because I said something that cannot be silenced." At that moment, there were only 1,000 people watching. 3 minutes later, the number had exceeded 50,000. And that was just the beginning. Jimmy continued speaking without taking his eyes off the screen. His voice did not rise, but each word was as sharp as a knife. "Of course I'm not afraid," he said. "But I can't control my anger, and I think you feel the same way. The president wanted to accuse me of inciting the people. Let me explain to you exactly what I did." He picked up a few pages from his desk. They were thick, white A4 sheets of paper. There were sentences marked with a highlighter and lines underlined. Jimmy held the documents up to the camera. "This," he said, "is the executive order I mentioned. It says, increase election security on the paper, but that's just a label. The real content is much darker." He continued speaking, opening the pages one by one and showing them. "Look at this line. In the event of social unrest or the spread of verified misinformation, federal authorities may relocate polling stations." What does that mean? After a brief pause, he looked directly into the camera. "This means that if anyone posts a fake tweet on social media saying, 'There's trouble at a polling station,' this regulation provides a legal basis for removing that polling station. And guess which areas are being targeted?" At that moment, the live broadcast began to echo on social media and television. At that moment, CNN suddenly interrupted the broadcast and displayed a subtitle. "Jimmy Butler. This law was written to silence people." In Miami, Atlanta, Detroit, and Baltimore, where there are large Black and Latino populations, how can polling stations be moved overnight and without asking anyone? The only reason? Disruptive rumors. Jimmy put down the documents, picked up his phone, shared the screen, opened his email inbox, and showed 2 emails. "Now I'll show you more." The first email contained the following sentence, written by a Justice Department official to a member of staff. "The entire legal team must be mobilized to ensure compliance with the executive order." The second email clearly stated, "Jimmy Butler poses a threat to administrative unity. Early intervention is essential." There was silence. Jimmy didn't speak for a while. He waited a few seconds for those watching to digest it. This is what oppression looks like. This is not surveillance. This is silencing. This is not unity. This is fear-mongering. His voice hadn't risen yet, but he was very determined. Adair. He spoke as if addressing a jury in a courtroom. He was simply telling the truth and the facts. "They called me dangerous. Actually, they are right. I am definitely a threat to lies. I am a threat to silence. And if someone is afraid because I speak the truth, that's fine, because I will never stop." By the 15th minute of the broadcast, the number of viewers had already surpassed 1 million. Stand With Jimmy was trending on X. Thousands of young people on TikTok had already started sharing clips from the broadcast with the hashtag #HearThisVoice. But the event didn't stay digital. At that moment, in a small cafe in Idaho, a young woman named Lacey, who worked as a barista, was watching Jimmy's broadcast on a tablet she had placed on top of the coffee machine. She had turned up the volume slightly, but when everyone inside heard Jimmy's voice, they all paid attention. An elderly man called out, "Could you turn up the volume a little, young lady?" The young man behind her was staring at his phone with his eyes wide open. A mother pulled her baby's stroller slowly to the side and leaned over, whispering, "Is this really legal?" When the broadcast ended, no one moved. Then one person began to applaud, then others. The cafe echoed quietly, but resolutely, with Jimmy's voice. At the same time in Santa Fe, Gloria, a retired teacher, was sitting at her kitchen table. After watching the broadcast, she sent an email to her former students. "History is at the door. Pay attention." The replies came one by one. Some sent screenshots of the broadcast. Others simply wrote, "Seen, shared." In Jimmy's office in Miami, Marcus Ray was preparing a tweet, but Jimmy reached out his hand. "Stop," he said. "Just the live broadcast is enough for today. Let's move forward with the power of the truth alone." At that moment, news channels began to split. ESPN aired short clips from the broadcast under the headline, "Athletes Speak Truth." CNN replayed the live broadcast. Fox News ran the headline, "Butler Provocation." But what everyone was talking about was this. Jimmy didn't yell. He didn't insult anyone. He spoke with documents and evidence. And that was even more dangerous, because now no one could easily label him irresponsible. That night, something began to stir across the country. In Lansing, people took to the streets with signs reading, "Voting is not a crime." In Tallahassee, a law student organized a silent march with candles. 600 people participated. In Shreveport, people sang, "This light is ours," in unison. Screens were filled with Jimmy Butler's face, and there was one question growing inside everyone. Did they really go this far? From Miami to Minneapolis, from Fresno to New York, people across the country were glued to their screens. Some were brewing tea in the kitchen, some were on break at school, some were on the bus, rewatching the broadcast with headphones. But the message echoed everywhere. This isn't just Jimmy's story, it's our story too. At the White House, however, the situation was completely different. Trump and his advisors sat in tense silence at the Oval Office conference table. One of the screens showed a small but determined protest in Topeka, Kansas. Elderly women carried "Let him speak" signs, while young people handed out free water. Trump pointed at the television. "Turn that off," he said, without even looking at the screen. But no one moved. Chief Strategist Bennett Gorski's hands were sweaty. He spoke without looking at his notes. "Sir, that video, that broadcast, had a bigger impact than we thought. Frankly, we underestimated Butler." Trump frowned. "He's just another basketball player. They scream racism at every opportunity." But Communications Director Karen Stroud objected. Her voice was low but clear. "No, sir. He didn't shout. That's why it was more effective. He showed documents. He read emails. He was logical. He was reasonable. This is more dangerous." Trump leaned back. His eyes narrowed. "Then hit him harder. Go after him harder. Start smearing him." At that moment, the silence at the table rang out. A DOJ official, Rusk, spoke with his head bowed. "Launching a new crackdown could backfire, sir. We're already getting requests for internal audits of the Justice Department. The media is starting to ask, did someone leak this from inside?" Trump slammed his hand on the table. His face turned bright red. "Find that leak," he shouted. But at that moment, the screen on his phone lit up. A news alert. "The Crockett effect is growing. Reactions to the president's executive order are spreading." Trump swiped the notification away. Then he fixed his gaze on those around the table. "This is just one man. How are we losing the country over one man?" No one had an answer. But the country was not silent. Just 12 hours after Jimmy's broadcast, the internet exploded. The "Hair Stand with Jimmy" hashtag was trending at the top of the list. People were sharing memories of their elderly grandmothers casting their first votes, while high school students declared, "We will never be silenced again." But Jimmy remained silent. He didn't utter a single word after the broadcast. He didn't make any public appearances. He didn't speak to the press or post anything on social media. This played into the hands of his enemies. The smear campaign started on small websites. Are the organizations supporting Jimmy Butler linked to terrorism? A former lawyer. Butler should have stayed in basketball. Could the documents Jimmy showed be manipulated? No sources, no evidence. But that didn't matter. The goal was to create a wave of noise. Then right-wing podcasts got involved. A Nashville-based host accused Jimmy of being a system actor. Another from Austin said, "Butler is deliberately creating a crisis." The ugliest part was this. A video was manipulated. An email Jimmy showed during a live broadcast was made to look like it had been altered. It was combined with footage of a street protest unrelated to the broadcast. The internet began to treat this lie as if it were true. In Miami, Jimmy waited quietly in his office. He was sitting at his desk, scrolling through his phone. Marcus Ray came over and placed a file on the desk. The title read, "A summary of all the news stories that came out after the broadcast." Marcus paused for a moment. Then he asked, "Should we respond? Should we refute these one by one?" Jimmy shook his head. "No, not yet. Let things calm down and let everyone say what they think." That night, the attacks were not limited to the digital world. Jimmy's face was on a billboard in Miami. The next morning, a word was written in large red letters on it. Traitor. A radio host in North Carolina said that Jimmy's professional license should be revoked because of his public statements. A sheriff in Alabama wrote the following on Facebook. "This man is a threat to our democracy. He should be investigated." And the messages, "Who do you think you are? You're not MLK. You're just playing a role. We know where you work." That last message was taken seriously by Capitol Police. Security was increased. New security cameras were installed in the office. The lights were left on at night. There was no place to hide. But Jimmy remained calm and collected. He continued reading emails. He reviewed new bills. He met with activists. He didn't pay attention to what the public was saying. He didn't follow trending topics. He just did what he knew how to do. He kept talking. In an ex-post, he wrote a single sentence. If a person is attacked for reading the law, then the problem isn't with us. It's with the system. The post reached 4 million views. But that wasn't all. A letter that arrived that night was beyond anything else. An elderly woman had written from Savannah, Georgia. The handwriting was barely legible, but every letter was as solid as a rock. When I was 22, I wanted to vote. They told me I couldn't read or write, but I had memorized the first article of the Constitution. I read it word for word. They still turned me away. Don't give up, Jimmy. I'm watching you. Jimmy was moved. He put the letter in his pocket. From that day on, he always carried it with him. Bans, threats, fake news. It all came crashing down on him. But he wasn't speaking just for himself anymore. The moment he put that letter in his pocket, he made a promise to the past and future of thousands of people. This time, I won't stay silent. Support began to come from unexpected places. A week later, an announcement from South Dakota made headlines on all television networks. Republican Senator Charles Brantley stated during a live broadcast, "I do not support Jimmy Butler's politics, but demanding imprisonment for someone who merely read an official document aloud? This is not democracy. This is a state of fear." These words were repeated not just that day, but throughout the entire week. There was a deep silence at the White House, because up until that point, no Republican had ever openly defied an executive order in such a way. Communication advisors were giving statements to journalists one after another. These protests are being exaggerated. The impact of social media is always misleading. The president only wants the law to be enforced. But these statements were now ineffective, because the country had seen the truth with its own eyes. One morning, Jimmy was sipping his tea in his office when his phone rang. The number was unknown. The call was from outside Florida. The caller's identity was unknown. The screen displayed only this message: "No matter what you say, I believe you. You are not just the voice of your region, but of the country. I will speak today. Mr." Jimmy looked at the screen, then handed the phone to Marcus. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He checked the initials. He took a deep breath. "Senator Maxine Rhee," he said, "from Arizona. A Republican, former prosecutor. She's influential, but she wouldn't send a message like this lightly." Jimmy nodded. "So she's been listening." That afternoon, the same image appeared on all news channels. In front of the Senate building in Washington, D.C., there was a simple podium. No banners or posters behind it, just a handful of reporters and a sun umbrella. Senator Maxine Rhee was wearing a simple blazer. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was clear and tired, but she was determined. She leaned into the microphone. "I have reviewed the executive order from start to finish. I consulted with 3 different constitutional lawyers. They were non-activist, impartial experts. I also watched Jimmy Butler's live interview." She turned to the camera. She looked directly into the lens. "While we may disagree on many issues, we are united on this one. Voter suppression is contrary to the American spirit. And to threaten someone for speaking out, when that line is crossed, we cannot remain silent. I will not support this executive order as it stands." At that moment, the press fell silent. No questions were asked. The senator walked away, turned his back, and went inside. But his words had already begun to spread like wildfire. In his Miami office, Jimmy watched the video in silence. Marcus, sitting next to him, whispered, "Look, he showed courage too." Jimmy shook his head. "One more saw it. What will the others do now?" And indeed, the others began to act. Senator Paulo Desmond from Nebraska. "The way this regulation is being implemented bothers me." Representative Eric Mee from Iowa. "It's not our job to punish people for speaking out." Even on Fox News, a commentator who usually defends the government shook his head on air and said, "Maybe we should have read the order first." In the Oval Office, advisors looked at each other. It was no longer a crisis, it was a narrative collapse. Because the other side was no longer just protesters, they were voices rising from within the current system. An emergency meeting was called at the White House. Gorski threw Senator Rhee's speech transcript on the table. This is out of control. This isn't just a popular uprising. This is a loss of narrative. If one more person switches sides, this order will fall in the Senate. Press Secretary Dwight Reynolds paced in front of the glass. If we back down, we look weak. But if we increase the pressure, Butler will be proven right. Trump looked up. His gaze was stern. If he wants war, he'll get it. We'll go harder. We'll push harder. But DOJ Representative Rusk stood up. Mr. President, increasing the pressure could trigger a larger internal investigation at the Department of Justice right now. There's already a leak from inside about that shared email. Trump put his hands on the table. There was a deep silence. Then he said just one sentence. Find the leaks. But at the same time, a brand new leak had exploded in another corner of the internet. A reporter from the St. Paul Gazette published a story based on statements from 2 federal employees. The headline was simple but shocking. Butler was being monitored weeks before going on air. The article included the following sentence. In internal communications, Butler's social media accounts had been placed under surveillance. High-level pressure had been organized to prevent him from defying the executive order. That sentence was enough on its own, because the question echoing in everyone's minds, did they really go that far, was now giving way to another question. If this is true, who else is being silenced? Voices were rising from all corners of the country. Library workers, grocery store cashiers, high school students, former activists, young mothers, elderly veterans, all responded with one sentence. I saw it, I heard it. We will no longer turn a blind eye. In Phoenix, Senator Maxine Rhee took it a step further. One morning, away from the cameras, she held a meeting in the Senate courtyard with only 3 people present. Among them were a Democratic senator, an independent representative, and Jimmy Butler. A simple table. The first sentence written on the whiteboard. Real protection comes with legislation. Jimmy was twirling the pen in his hands. He looked up for a moment. If we just fix the edges, this system will come back around and bite us. If we're going to make a real change, we have to start from the roots. The others nodded. And on that day, the foundation was laid for the bill, known as the Voter Integrity and Access Framework. In short, ZAST. The drafts were passed around all night. Jimmy rewrote some sentences. He changed a few concepts. He polished the rough edges. Because he wasn't just fighting anymore. He was shaping the future. 2 weeks later, the bill was complete. A 36-page document. It included the following provisions. Establishment of minimum standards in all states for early voting. Requirement for community approval for relocation of polling places. Subjecting executive orders related to voting rights to judicial review. Clarification of the authority limits of federal observers. Transparency of public documents through digital access. News agencies did not make headlines, but people knew this was not just a document, it was an awakening. Jimmy did not hold a rally on launch day. Instead, he organized a Zoom meeting. He invited high school students from 5 states. Each asked, "Why didn't you sue the president?" Jimmy smiled, because this wasn't supposed to be a courtroom victory, but a social lesson. What if this law doesn't pass? Then we'll write the next one stronger. Trying isn't losing. What's next? Jimmy paused briefly before answering. Listen more. Shout less. Because we've gotten used to shouting, but sometimes the quietest ones say the truest things. Things began to change on the streets of Miami. Grocery stores posted signs on their windows reading, "Ask me about the voting plan." High school teachers began their lessons with Jimmy's broadcast. Churches organized Constitution reading nights. Barbers said to the young people sitting in their chairs, "Brother, election time is coming. Are you ready?" And Jimmy was there among them. No cameras, no applause, silent, real. He talked to children in markets, gyms, and under basketball hoops. One day someone approached him and asked, "Did you win, bro?" Jimmy shook his head. "This isn't a victory," he said. "This is maintenance. This is a cleanup. Tomorrow, the same dirt will come back. But now we know how to sweep." At a law school in Wisconsin, a professor projected the transcript of Jimmy's live broadcast onto the board. They discussed every sentence. They analyzed every pause. They talked about the intent behind every word. Then a female student raised her hand. "Why do you think it was so effective?" The professor took off his glasses. "Because he didn't yell," he said. "Because he really knew what he was up against. And because he wasn't talking to his enemies. He was talking to his neighbors." Months later, Jimmy stood in front of the school where he played basketball for the first time as a child. It was career day. The students were lined up with name tags. The class teacher introduced Jimmy to the children. "This is a national basketball player." And more. A child raised his finger. "Are you famous now?" Jimmy knelt down. He lowered himself to eye level. "No," he said. "I just didn't let someone lie." The teacher smiled. Before leaving, Jimmy gave each child a small book, a pocket constitution. On the first page, he had written a note in his own handwriting. "This is yours. Read it aloud. Keep it close." That night, when Marcus arrived at the office, Jimmy was still at his desk. He had a new document in his hand, a new proposal. Marcus asked, "What if this law doesn't pass either?" Jimmy looked up. His eyes were tired, but the light inside him hadn't gone out. "Then we'll write another one," he said, "and another one, until these lands learn that we cannot be silenced." A short pause, then he added, "I didn't come here to make headlines. I came here so that one day someone else won't have to defend themselves." And so it began, with a threatened voice, with a shared truth, and with a question mark that no one could ignore. Who's next? The answer was simple: all of us. But we were no longer alone, because someone had dared to speak up first. Do you think it's fair for an athlete to be threatened just for speaking out? Share your thoughts in the comments and add your voice to this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with more people.